Yes. Am I audible? Please confirm. Okay. So I welcome you all to this CUET UG Vijeta Series 2022. So as you all know, this CUET is a common university entrance test, and this is one of the most important entrance tests if you are in UG, like if you are in 12th standard and you want to get admissions in any of the biological sciences related to, you want to enter into the central universities. So this is one of the most important exam, okay, the CUET UG. So for that particular exam that is going to be conducted, especially this year from 15th of July, so the days are nearby. So we have this Vijeta series for you all. So as you all know, already yesterday there was one class. From 28 June it has already started, and today is the second session, right? So let's get started and let's use this series to gain more knowledge and prepare yourself so that you can perform well in the CUT UG exams. So let's get started. May I see a BIO in the chat box? Are you all excited? Yes? Tell me. Okay. Okay. So as we see over here, BIO coming up. So let's talk about the first unit 1. Okay, so the unit 1 is about reproduction. So in this unit 1, the topic that I'm going to discuss today is about menstrual cycle. Okay, now if you see the previous year question papers, so a lot of questions are asked from this menstrual cycle that is related to your reproduction, but these questions are basically hormone based questions. So we will try to understand the cycle, and definitely we'll see the roles of various hormones that are involved in this particular cycle, right? So I'm sure you all are excited. Now let's continue with our topic, that is the menstrual cycle. So before I start with the session, I would insist all of you all to download the app, the BioTecNika app. As you all know, it is one of the most user friendly and one of the most uh, used widely, this app, and I'm sure you all have downloaded the app. If not, please do it now. As you can see, a lot of sessions are going to come up and you will be able to attend those sessions, and those are free of cost. So it's like you will be enhancing your knowledge. So download this app and do join BioTecNika on the Telegram app as well. So the link you can see on the screen. So you can join this link and you can further be in contact with BioTecNika. You can you can see the various sessions that are coming up and the lectures that are there. So it will all help you in in preparing for your exam. Yes. So first question is, what is the menstrual cycle? Okay. So when we talk about this menstrual cycle, so some get confused, like what it is actually, right? We have heard of this term, but we really don't know what it is. So in layman terms, what basically it is a reproductive cycle in the female primates. Okay, whether you talk about monkeys, apes, but we are going to talk about the human beings. Okay, so today's session will be about the menstrual cycle, and this reproductive cycle in the female primates is known as menstrual cycle, right? So this menstrual cycle is on an average for around 28 to 29 days. So what happens in this menstrual cycle and all that, the events, the phases, that what is this menstrual cycle basically is, for this 28 days, so some changes will occur in the female body, right? So those changes keep on repeating after every 28 days. So that is why we call it as a cycle, right? Because those changes, you will see that the changes will keep on repeating after every 28 to 29 days. So the cycle on average is for 28 days, but yes, person to person it might vary, right? For some it might be little longer, for some it might be little shorter, but yes, if it's an optimum body with no issues, so it is around 28 days. So the cycle of events starting from one menstruation till the next one, so that cycle we call it as the menstrual cycle, right? So today we'll be seeing what are the phases that are there and what are the hormonal changes that occur in the female body associated with the menstrual cycle events. Okay, so first let's see two terms over here. So first term is known as menarche, right? So, what is menarche? Menarche is the first menstruation which begins at puberty, right? So, the menstruation cycle, when it starts at the puberty, so that beginning part, okay, or the beginning when it occurs, the first time when it occurs, so that is known as menarche, right? So, basically, menarche on an average for females, it is around 12 years. But again, okay, so it can range from around 10 to 16 years. Okay, but on an average, if a female is of 12 years, so the menarche starts. Okay, then another term is menopause. Okay, so by the term pause means yes, this menstrual cycle is going to stop over here, right? At some age the menstrual cycle will get stopped because there it has a pause over here. So the menstrual cycle will cease or it will stop at around 50 years on an average, but yes, it can vary, like, you know, for Indian population 45 to 55 years on an average, the different females will face this menopause, right? Okay, now before we start with the reproductive cycle, so let's talk about the reproductive tract, the female reproductive tract. Okay, so the female reproductive tract, what all it includes. So if you can see this figure, so we have a pair of ovaries, okay, and then further there is a fallopian tube, right? So this part that you can see, so this is the fallopian tube. So fallopian tube, what it does actually, it connects this ovary to the uterus. So this broad structure that you can see over here, so this is the uterus, and this part is known as uterine fundus. And further, okay, there is the lower part of the uterus, so it is known as cervix, and there is a external opening or external genitalia, so that is known as vulva. So it is just after the vagina, and vagina is that part, it is a, you know, it will connect the lower part of the uterus, that is the cervix, okay, with the vulva, the external part. So this vagina part, it is also known as the birth canal, okay, because it acts as a canal that joins this cervix lower part of uterus to outside of the body. So it is also known as even the birth canal. Now, further, if you see over here in the fallopian tube, so the fallopian tube has this fimbriae like structure. So these are finger like projections that you can see over here. Okay. And then next to it, the part of fallopian tube is known as infundibulum. So what does this infundibulum do? It basically, infundibulum will collect the ovum. So ovary work is to release the ova or the ovum. Okay. And this ovum, when it is released, it will be collected by this infundibulum. And further, so you can see it is a funnel shaped structure, and then further it will move through the ampulla. So the ampulla has a broad part, okay, and it has thin wall cells that are present over here. So ova will further move through the ampulla and then further through the isthmus. So all these are parts of your fallopian tube. So what is this isthmus? Isthmus is, again, it is a thick walled structure that is present ovum will move, and it is in the fallopian tube where the fertilization occurs. Means the ova that is released over here will fertilize with the sperm if at all present. So the fertilization part takes place in this fallopian tube, right? Then next is the uterus. Now uterus has, you know, different layers of, it is divided into different walls, you can say. Okay, so the outermost wall is known as perimetrium, the middle one, that is the muscular part, okay, that is known as myometrium, and the innermost part of uterus, so it is known as endometrium, right? Next is the cervix, then cervical canal and vagina. So I'll be talking about their functions little bit more So first, fallopian tubes, you have to remember what is what is their function. I told you it is fertilization, right? Then what is uterus doing? So uterus is once the fertilized egg, fertilization occurs in the fallopian tube. So this fertilized egg will get implanted over here in the uterus. Okay, so uterus basically helps in developing pregnancy, you can say. So it is a womb where the fertilized egg will get implanted, right? Then the innermost layer, I told you, it is the endometrium. So it is one of the most important lining of the uterus, and it is when this egg does not get fertilized. So in the menstrual cycle, in the menstruation phase, this lining actually comes out in the form of bleeding, right? Okay, then lower to uh, the uterus, okay, you have the lower part, that is the cervix. So here again you have various epithelial cells that are present. So the cervix will secrete cervical mucus. Remember, cervical mucus. Okay, so what it is a mixture of water, glycoproteins, lipids, enzymes, and inorganic salts. Okay, so what is the role of this cervical mucus? So you need to know, okay, what all it is composed of. Sometimes they ask you in multiple choice questions. So it is necessary that you know its composition. And the function of the cervical mucus basically is it helps in nourishment, okay, as well as when the sperm moves inside the female reproductive tract. So the cervical mucus, the secretions, it actually helps or protects the sperm in the female reproductive tract. Okay, and another term that is it does, okay, a function that is known as sperm capacitation. Okay, so what is this sperm capacitation? Capacitation means this sperm, okay, when it comes into the female body, so some level of maturation of the sperm occurs in this female reproductive tract. It matures over here in the female reproductive tract before it fertilizes with the egg in the fallopian tube. So that maturation part that is taking place in the female reproductive tract, so that is known as sperm capacitation or capacitation. And for that, cervical mucus will play a very important role over here, right? Okay, next. Now you can see this figure, like you can see we have a pair of ovaries. Okay, so ovary is a oval shaped gland that is present. Okay, now we will see what is inside the ovary. Okay, so we will dissect it and we'll observe what is present inside the ovary. So ovary has ovarian follicles. Okay, so these follicles actually will further, you can see these are the different follicles that will lead to the release of ova, or the female gamete. Okay, or ovum. So in this figure, what you see is the different stages of ovarian follicle development. So why you need to know all this? Because before we go into the cycle, you need to know what is a primordial follicle, what is a primary follicle. Okay, because if you just use the terms, so you will not be able to understand what is a primary follicle or what is a Graafian follicle. So all these are important terms. These are the different stages that you will see over here in the ovarian follicle development. So the first thing, so when a child, in the womb only itself, okay, in the womb itself, the primordial follicles will be present. Okay, so if we talk about the female gametes, so the formation of gametes in the ovary will start before the birth of the female child. Okay, so before the birth, in the fetal life only, there will be around 6 million to 7 million eggs, okay, or these follicles that will be present, but they do not mature at that time. Okay, so they get freezed. So the detailed oogenesis process also we are going to discuss at the end. So before that, just understand how these follicles develop. Okay, so you have the first stage of this follicle development. So this gametes, the first stage of the oogenesis is basically the primordial follicle. Okay, so in the primordial follicle, what is happening is, you can see that there is just one layer of follicular cells that are present, or you can say these are your granulosa cells, the brown color cells that you can see, okay, surrounding the oocyte. Okay, so purple one is the oocyte, okay, the meat. So it is surrounded by just one layer of cells. So there are millions of primordial follicles that are present during the fetal life. Okay, but when the child is born, so at birth, from that millions, there are only around, you can say, 2 lakh to 20 lakh that will be present. Okay, many of them it will undergo atresia. Okay, so what is this atresia? Basically, these follicles, they will not develop and they will die. Okay, so they'll be removed. So that is your atresia term that is being used. So at birth, around 2 to 20 lakh of these eggs will be present. Okay, then when the female reaches the puberty, so that time still, further the number will decrease, and there will be only around 40,000 of it. Okay, the follicles. And then further, when the female matures and ovulates, so among them only 300 to 400 will actually perform this cycle. Okay, so we are left with only this many follicles, right? Now let's see the development stages over here. So the first stage of the ovarian follicle development is the primordial follicle, where the oocyte is just surrounded by one layer of cells. So that one layer is the granulosa cells. Okay, so here it is also written as follicle cells, or you can say the brown color cells are the granulosa cells. Next, then the second stage is known as the primary follicle. Okay, so in the primary follicle, what you can see is these one layer of granulosa cells. Okay, so they'll divide and they form a large number, or large, many layers of granulosa cells you can see over here. Okay, so the oocyte is surrounded by a large, many, or you can say many layers of granulosa cells, and surrounding the oocyte there is a glycoprotein layer, the blue color layer that you can see. So that has also developed in primary follicle stage, so that is known as zona pellucida. It is a glycoprotein layer that provides nourishment to the oocyte. Then at the outermost region of this surrounding the granulosa cells, a layer of cells form that is known as thecal cells. Okay, and further these theca cells, or you can also say thecal cells, so they will form interna as well as externa theca, or you can say interna or externa. Okay, so these are known as interna thecal cells, and this will be known as external or externa thecal cells. So interna will be inner, externa will be outer. So basically, interna is important because it will lead to the production of these cells, will help in the formation of the hormone that is your estrogens. Okay, so theca interna, remember, it plays a role in the release of estrogen hormones. While externa, basically, it will form the the basement membrane, the outermost layer, right? Then after primary follicle, next in development, what happens is these follicular cells, okay, they secrete a follicular fluid. So that fluid will get accumulated in a cavity that forms inside. So this cavity is known as antrum cavity. Okay, so this is the characteristic of secondary follicle. Then further, after secondary follicle comes the next stage, that is known as the Graafian follicle stage. So in Graafian follicle stage is one of the most important stage, because remember, it is that stage where ovulation will occur. What is ovulation? Ovulation is the release of the ova or the oocyte, right? So ovulation, remember, in which stage of follicle development will occur? It will occur in the Graafian follicle stage. So what is the characteristic of Graafian follicle? Graafian follicle is that stage where you can see that the antrum size will increase, the cavity becomes much larger. Okay, and it is that stage where ovulation will take place, the Graafian follicle stage, and the oocyte will be released. Now, another important characteristic that you can see over here is the oocyte is surrounded by a layer of granulosa cells. Okay, surrounding along with the zona pellucida, it has a brown layer of cells that you can see. So this layer of cells is known as corona radiata, right? Now, so once the ovulation takes place, the remaining of the follicle, okay, the remaining of the follicle is known as corpus luteum. Okay, now again it depends. So if fertilization takes place, if the ova gets fertilized, so this corpus luteum is maintained as it is, and it will start releasing hormones like HCG. Okay, but it'll start releasing hormones. Okay, like sorry, it'll be your progesterone and estrogens. Okay, under the influence of HCG hormone that is released by the placenta. So this will occur only when fertilization takes place. But if fertilization does not take place, so in that case these corpus luteum will degenerate and forms a structure that is known as corpus albicans. Okay, so when it forms corpus albicans means there will be no fertilization that will take place and the menstrual cycle will follow, okay, where the menstruation phase occurs. So these are the different stages of ovarian follicle development that you need to know. Primordial follicle, the first one. Second is primary follicle. Third is secondary follicle, and fourth is the Graafian follicle stage. Okay, now let's start with our reproductive cycle. The female reproductive cycle, on an average, it is for 28 days. And here majorly you have to know the roles of different hormones like FSH, LH, estrogens, progesterones. Okay, so this reproductive cycle in females is divided into four phases, right? So, though we call it as the menstrual cycle, but the first phase in this menstrual cycle is the cycle and the phase. So, the first phase is menstrual phase. Second phase, you call it as follicular or proliferative phase. Okay, where the follicles will, they will start forming different follicles, and then one matures. So that is why this is known as follicular or proliferative phase. After this proliferative phase, the next phase is ovulation. Okay, so ovulation means, what is ovulation? Anybody can tell me now? What is ovulation? What did we say? What is ovulation? We saw, right, in the Graafian follicle stage, the ovulation takes place. So, what is this ovulation stage? What occurs? Yes. So, what is it? It is basically the release of ova that occurs over here. So, that is your ovulation. Yes. Next is the luteal or the secretory phase. So, this is the fourth phase that is known as the luteal or the secretory phase. Okay. So, we'll see their characteristic one by one. So, the different phases, as you can see, is the menstrual phase, follicular phase, ovulation, and luteal phase. And along with it, we'll see the changes in hormones that takes place, the body temperature, how it changes, and the follicular development. Okay. Okay. So the first phase is menstrual phase. So in menstrual phase, what is happening over here is this phase, in the 28 days cycle, the first 5 days is for menstrual phase. Okay, so in menstrual, the ova has not fertilized, so the menstrual flow will occur because of the breakdown of these endometrial lining of the uterus. Okay, and its blood vessels. So why it is occurring? Because the ovum has not got fertilized. While if you see in the ovary, what is happening is, under the influence of the hormone, that is your FSH hormone. So you can see the green line. So this is the FSH or follicle stimulating hormone. So this follicle stimulating hormone is coming from, or it is released from, the pituitary gland. So under the influence of FSH in the ovary, the follicles will start developing. Okay, so initially it is a primordial follicle, right? Then primary follicle, secondary follicle, and then becomes Graafian follicle. So initially when these follicles are developing, so it is developing under the influence of FSH. So the primordial follicles will develop into primary and secondary follicle stage, right? And in the uterus, because there is no fertilization, so the progesterones and estrogens levels will be less. Okay, so because their levels will be less, as you can see in this figure, the progesterone and estrogen levels are less. So because their levels are less, so it will release, or it will stimulate the release of prostaglandins. So what these prostaglandins do, so there are arterioles that are present. So these arterioles supply blood to the endometrium, right? The cells that are present in the endometrium. But now, under the influence of prostaglandins, these arterioles, they will constrict. So when they constrict means the blood flow will decrease. So when blood flow decreases means the cells will not be able to receive enough blood, so these cells will die, and that is how the menstrual flow occurs, where the bleeding occurs. Okay, so what it is basically, it is the endometrial cells that are shed out. And then if you talk about the temperature of the body of the female, so it is around 36 degrees centigrade. Okay, so these are the characteristic of the first phase, that is menstrual phase. Okay. After menstrual phase is the proliferative or the follicular phase. So proliferative phase will last for around 6 to 13 days. Okay. So 6 to 13 is the follicular phase. So in this phase, what is happening is in the ovaries, now a large number of follicles were developing. Okay. But one of the secondary ovarian follicle will dominate, okay, over the other follicles that are growing, and that dominant secondary ovarian follicle will secrete hormones like estrogens and inhibins. Okay, so these hormones when they are released will cause atresia. Okay, atresia of what? Atresia of other less mature follicles. I told you atresia means the less mature follicles will not be able to go towards the next phase, that is the graphene follicle, or they will not mature. Okay, so only one follicle is maturing. Okay, one secondary ovarian follicle will dominate in the ovary and it will mature and it will go towards the next phase, that is after your secondary follicle. Okay, so it will become further the graphene follicle, right? So you have the primordial, primary, secondary, and then the graphene follicle. So that one particular follicle will dominate and it will go towards the next phase, that is the graphene follicle stage. Okay, and then if you see the role of other hormones like FSH, so when these estrogens and inhibins are released by one particular growing follicle, so these hormones will inhibit the FSH secretion. So you can see the FSH level is going down over here. Okay, the FSH, the green curve that you can see, it is going down because these are inhibins, so it will inhibit the release of FSH. Okay, so when FSH is not present means the other follicles will not grow. So because FSH is inhibited, so it will cause the atresia of the other less mature follicles. Okay, so remember the name of these hormones and try to correlate with the various phases. Okay, then next is in the uterus what is happening. So because there is release of estrogen, okay, that is secreted by the ovarian follicles, so in the uterus you can see now the endometrial epithelial cells will proliferate. So that is why we call it as the proliferative phase, where these endometrial cells will proliferate and you can see their levels will increase, right? So now in this phase you can see the estrogens levels are high. Okay, so one of the estrogen is known as estradiol. So this is one of the most important estrogen. Okay, so there are different types of estrogen, so one of them is estradiol, which whose levels increase during this proliferative phase. So in proliferative phase, remember what is happening is one follicle will grow and it will suppress the growth of other follicles. Okay, it will dominate over other growing follicles, it will secrete estrogen, it will secrete inhibin, and it will inhibit the release of FSH. So FSH levels goes down, so as a result other follicles cannot grow, and then because of estrogens levels going up, so the endometrial cells will proliferate and the endometrial lining will increase. So why this is occurring? Basically it occurs to prepare the uterus for fertilization. Okay, so once fertilization occur, so the implantation to prepare it, so this levels will increase, the endometrial cells will help in, it acts as a womb, right? Okay, next, after follicular phase, the next phase is the ovulation phase. So ovulation phase is just for 1 day. Okay, so in that 1 day, that is the 14th day. Okay, so on the day 14 of this 28-day cycle, ovulation will take place. So that is in the graphene follicle stage where the ovulation is going to occur, right? So in this stage you can see the ova is released. So that is what is happening during the follicular development. Okay, so in the ovaries, because of high levels of estrogens, so when estrogen levels increases further, there'll be a positive feedback. Okay, what is positive feedback? Positive feedback means if one hormone is being released, okay, so it will further enhance the release of the previous hormones, that like we talk about negative feedback where the product will inhibit the initial steps, but here when we talk about positive feedback, so the product, that is the hormone over here, will stimulate or further increase the level of the previous hormones. Okay, so when estrogen levels increase, as you can see, the estradiol levels is increasing, so it will stimulate the gonadotrophin releasing hormone and luteinizing hormone secretion. So gonadotrophin releasing hormone is the hormone that is released by hypothalamus. Okay, so it is a releasing hormone. So what this hypothalamus hormone will do further, it will stimulate the pituitary to release the luteinizing hormone. Okay, so the pituitary will release this LH. LH is known as the luteinizing hormone, right? So that is this luteinizing hormone. So under the influence of estrogens, gonadotrophin releasing hormone will take place. So you can see on ovulation, for ovulation you need LH. So LH is one of the most important hormone. And yes, some levels of FSH is also present because there's a positive feedback. So gonadotrophin releasing hormone can also stimulate the pituitary to release FSH, right? But its level is much lower compared to luteinizing. So luteinizing hormone is one of the most important hormone that is required for ovulation. So luteinizing hormone, what it does, it causes the rupture of this mature ovarian follicle. So this is your Graafian follicle, right? So there will be release of the oocyte. So this oocyte, now the oocyte is also present in different stages. So this is presently the secondary oocyte. Okay, and this secondary oocyte, as I told you in the beginning also, it is surrounded by the zona pellucida layer, as well as it is surrounded by the corona radiata. So once ovulation takes place, so this secondary oocyte will further move into the fallopian tube or the uterine tube. Okay, and then if you talk about the temperature, so in the ovulation phase, what happens, the body temperature, there is a slight increase in body temperature. From 36, you can see the body temperature will rise to 37. So there is an increase in body temperature during ovulation. And so this, all these changes are just occurring in, the ovulation is just for one day, that is on the day 14. Okay, now further, what happens during ovulation, the follicular cells will release enzymes. So as we can see, the Graafian follicle will get digested, so because the follicular cells will release enzyme to digest the connective tissue. Okay, so that will lead to the release of the of the oocyte. Okay, so just before ovulation, the oocyte will complete its first meiotic division. So this is about the oogenesis part that I was telling that we will see in the end. So oogenesis will occur over here. So oogenesis is basically meiosis will occur. Okay, so the oocyte will complete its first meiotic division. So that is how it will form the secondary oocyte, that is known as the ovum. And as I told you before, this ovum will be surrounded by zona pellucida and the corona radiata. So what is this corona radiata? It is a layer of granulosa cells. So it will move. Okay, this ovum will further be moving in the uterine tube, and that is where it can get fertilized if a sperm is present. Okay, now, so females have a pair of ovaries, right? But only one ovum is released every month. So each ovary, okay, will release only 6 ova. So how it occurs is, if one month, if the, if right side releases, the other month the left side ovary will release. So that is how each ovary will release only 6 ova per year. Okay, so this also is important. So at a time, only one ova is released in normal conditions, right? Okay, now, so after ovulation, the last phase is known as the secretory phase or the luteal phase, right? So in the luteal phase, what is this luteal phase when it is occurring? So this luteal phase will be occurring for the next 14 days. So it lasts for 14 days after ovulation, means from 14 to 28 days. It is the luteal phase or the secretory phase. So now what all is happening in the luteal or the secretory phase? So in the ovaries, luteinizing hormone is already released, right? So this luteinizing hormone will lead to the formation of corpus luteum. I told you, once the ovum is released, the secondary oocyte is released, so the remaining of it is known as corpus luteum, the remaining of the follicle. Okay, and this corpus luteum can secrete progesterone. Under the influence of LH, corpus luteum can secrete progesterone. So you can see the progesterone levels are increasing. Now, if fertilization does not occur, so I told you this corpus luteum will degenerate after around 2 weeks. Okay, so when it degenerates, you call it as corpus albicans. Okay, so progesterone estrogen levels will decline if it forms this corpus albicans. So you can see the progesterone estrogen levels will decline, and now the FSH and LH secretion will take place. Means further menstrual cycle will occur. Okay, the continuation will occur after luteal phase. Next, the menstrual phase will occur. Means again this endometrial cells will be shed out. But this is only when fertilization does not occur. But if fertilization occurs, so the corpus luteum will be maintained as it is. Okay, it'll stay there for much longer time. Okay, until and unless no, the child is developing. Okay, so it will stay there for longer time because of the release of HCG hormone by the placenta. Okay, human chorionic hormone. Okay, so that is your HCG hormone. So under that influence of HCG, this corpus luteum will be maintained. And now when corpus luteum is maintained, so what will happen is the progesterone levels will be always high. Okay, so its level will not go down. Now that is very important for maintaining pregnancy, because only under the influence of progesterone you can see that the endometrial cells will proliferate. So when they proliferate, they prepare the womb for the implantation process, right? So that is why in females, if the females are facing some issues where there is miscarriage, so doctors, they insist on checking this progesterone levels. So if the progesterone levels are less, means there will be some problem in implantation. So progesterone is one of the most important hormone that helps in maintaining the pregnancy. So the term is maintaining the pregnancy. Okay, so these were the different phases. So all these phases includes the menstrual cycle. So all these phases together we call it as the menstrual cycle. And over here again, if you talk about the temperature of the body, so the temperature of the body is little still higher, but by the end of this the end of this secretory phase, the temperature will again go down if the fertilization does not occur. Okay, and then the cycle will continue. Right, so this is your luteal or secretory phase. So why we call it as a secretory phase? Basically because of the secretion of these important hormones that help in maintaining the pregnancy, that is your progesterones, as well as there'll be some levels of estrogens that is maintained. Okay, so in the uterus, progesterone and estrogen secreted by corpus luteum will help in the growth of endometrial glands. There'll be vascularization, means blood vessels formation will be there. These cells will be supplied with ample amount of blood so that they can, no, they can, these cells can proliferate, and there will be thickening of these endometrium cells. Okay, so they have increased secretory potential, these endometrial cells. So that is how they prepare the uterus for implantation of the fertilized egg. But if fertilization does not occur, so remember this progesterones and estrogens levels will go down, they will be withdrawn. Okay, so no more progesterone estrogen, means the cycle will continue and the menstrual phase will again continue. Okay, so these are the 4 important phases. Now, next is about the oogenesis part. Okay, what is oogenesis basically? Oogenesis is the process, you can say, where the formation of gametes in ovaries takes place. Okay, so basically it is the formation of the gametes in ovaries, right? So basically for oogenesis, again meiosis will take place and the germ cells will undergo maturation. So these 2 figures, okay, that you can see over here, it is quite similar. Okay, so what is happening, I'll follow this figure. So you can see oogenesis is taking place where the gamete formation is taking place, and what is happening in the follicular development part. So follicular development, already you have an idea. I told you what are the different stages. So we discussed primordial, primary, secondary, and mature follicle. Okay, right? So mature follicle is your Graafian follicle stage, and finally ovulation occurs. So now what is happening to the gamete? Okay, so it passes through various stages. It undergoes mitosis and then meiosis, and that is how it will form the secondary oocyte. Okay, so that process is known as itself. As I said, there are millions of these germ cells that are present. Okay, so these are known as oogonium. So these oogonium are 2n cells. Okay, means they are diploid cells. Okay, so we are talking about what is happening in the fetal life. So these oogonium, the diploid cells, they will undergo mitosis. Okay, so when mitosis occurs, means what happens in mitosis? 2n will form 2n cells. So if you have a parent 2n cell, so it will undergo, replication occurs, it forms 4n, and again it divides in the mitosis, so it forms 2n and 2n. So from one cell you get two daughter cells. So in this way the number of cells increases, but they are all 2n, they are all diploid. So that is what is happening in mitosis. Now these 2n cells, okay, we call them as primary oocytes. Now these primary oocytes will undergo meiosis. Okay, now meiosis is a reductional division. Okay, like mitosis is a equational division, meiosis is a reductional division. So in reductional division, what happens is, if you start with a 2n cell, so there will be two division that will take place. So first replication will occur, so 2n will form 4n, but now in first division, so there are two stages in meiosis, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. So after meiosis 1, it will form two daughter cells that will have 2n and 2n. Okay, and further in the second meiosis, again it will form two daughter cells from each of them. So it will form n and n. So now what we see is, now the daughter cells that are formed, so they are having n, or they are haploid in nature. So these are the gametes, the n stage. Okay, so they are the haploid state cells. So when in the primary oocyte meiosis occurs, so first, when meiosis occurs, so again there are different phases. So in one phase, that is in prophase 1 phase, so this meiosis will get freezed over here, means they'll not be able to complete it. Okay, so they'll be freeze somewhere over here. Okay, so the first division has not occurred, so they get freezed in prophase 1. Now in childhood, so the female is born, and in childhood there is no development of follicles that is taking place. Okay, and the follicle stage is primordial follicle stage only. Next, what happens when the female reaches the puberty to the menopause each month? So these primary oocyte will continue this meiosis. Okay, so the primary oocyte that was in prophase 1 will further complete the meiosis 1. So you can see, okay, now here like 2n, they have written n and n, so that is also fine. Okay, so 2n, you can say after 2n, it can form n and n. Okay, so if you start with the n cell, okay, so it becomes, if you start with n, you can call it as 2n and then n and n. Okay, but yes, remember, these are the half of the chromosomes it will have. So the primary oocyte still in prophase 1, primary oocyte stage, meiosis 1 gets completed. So after the first division, you get the two daughter cell that is having n, that is first polar body, so it is having half of it. Okay, so you can just correlate like that, half of the previous number, so 2n becomes n. Now this n is the secondary oocyte. Okay, so after meiosis 1, meiosis 2, finally when they are forming the end, that is the n and n, so one is the polar body and the second one is the secondary oocyte. Okay, now this secondary oocyte is, again, it has not completed the meiosis 2. Okay, so it is still in metaphase 2 stage, but at this stage it is a mature follicle. So inside the mature follicle you have the secondary oocyte, so that is the ovum that is released. So in the metaphase 2 stage only, this ovum is present. Okay, so it has not completed the meiosis 2, and that time it will fertilize with the sperm cell. Okay, now when it fertilizes with a sperm cell, only then it will complete the meiosis 2. Okay, so meiosis 2 will get completed, and then this n gets fertilized with the sperm cell, so now it becomes a zygote, it becomes a 2n, and again it will give rise to a second polar body, and there's a possibility that the first polar body that was n, that, so these are vegetative cells. Okay, the polar bodies. So these vegetative cells can again undergo, the first polar body can also undergo meiosis too, and it can give rise to two more polar bodies. So at the end there can be three polar bodies, but these polar bodies does not play a role in gamete formation, so these polar bodies will degenerate. Okay, so that is how you get the ovum, right? So same thing is written over here, like you start with the oogonium 2 and it will undergo mitosis, primary oocyte, it will undergo meiosis 1, so it will form secondary oocyte, first polar body. First polar body can form secondary, the meiosis 2 again, it can form two more polar bodies, while the secondary oocyte in the metaphase 2 state, it can fertilize with the sperm cell, so it will fertilize and it will form the zygote, that is 2n, and it can give rise to second polar body. So in total these three polar bodies will get degenerated. So the nuclear sperm cell and ovum unite and will form a zygote, that is 2n. So that is how the chromosome numbers are maintained. So n and n will fuse and it becomes a 2n. Okay, fertilization occurs, and that is how from haploid gametes it becomes a diploid zygote, right? So this is what is oogenesis. And we also saw along with oogenesis how the follicular development is taking place. So basically you have the primordial follicle, then primary follicle, that is the primary oocyte. Secondary follicle is also the primary oocyte, that is in prophase 1. Mature follicle is your secondary oocyte, that is in metaphase 2 state. And finally, from the mature follicle, ovulation will take place. Okay, so we come to the last part where we will summarize the effect of hormones in the female reproductive cycle, the secretion and physiological effects. So what all we saw, you can correlate over here with the release of various hormones. So I spoke about gonadotrophin releasing hormone released by hypothalamus. So it will stimulate the release of hormones like FSH and LH from the anterior pituitary gland. Now, FSH, what it will do, it is a follicular stimulating hormone. It will help in the development of ovarian follicle. So you can correlate like that. Follicle, it will help in the development of ovarian follicles. While FSH in the ovaries, there will be development of the ovarian follicles. And when the follicles are developing, the corpus luteum is formed. So there will be secretion of estrogens and inhibin, right? So again, under the influence of LH, so LH will stimulate ovulation where the ovum is being released, and LH also stimulates the formation of corpus luteum. So corpus luteum is present means it will lead to the secretion of progesterone, estrogens, inhibin, and one more hormone that is known as relaxin. Okay, so what is the role of these various hormones? We'll see over here. Estrogens, remember, they help in the development and maintenance of female reproductive structures. Okay, the female sexual characteristics, the breast formation. So all this is under the influence of estrogens. Then it also promotes protein anabolism, formation of proteins. It lowers the blood cholesterol. So this is one of the primary reasons why the females, okay, they suffer less with heart attack compared to males, because these estrogens level will lower the cholesterol levels of the female body. Then there will be moderate levels inhibit the release of, so you can see there will be a negative feedback where if slight amount of estrogens, they can show a negative feedback where they can inhibit the release of gonadotrophin releasing hormone, FSH and LH. Okay, then next is your progesterone. So we spoke about progesterone. So basically it is helping in maintaining pregnancy. It works with estrogens to prepare endometrium, so it helps in implantation. It also prepares the mammary glands so that it can secrete the the milk secretion that takes place, and it can inhibit the release of gonadotrophin releasing hormone and LH. Okay, so under the influence of progesterone, it can inhibit this gonadotrophin releasing hormone and LH, because no, if fertilization takes place, so you do not need further LH, right? You don't need ovulation. Then relaxin, what it does basically, it inhibits the contractions of the smooth muscles in the uterus. So when the female is pregnant, so contractions should not take place, right? So that is why relaxin is released by the corpus luteum. But when the female is under labor, okay, so that time, because for childbirth, so for childbirth, what should happen is there should be release of this relaxin, so it will increase the flexibility of the pubic symphysis. Okay, and it will dilate the uterine cervix. right? So that is what is happening over here. So during labor, relaxin will help in the dilation of uterine cervix, means it will help during the labor, while relaxin will inhibit the contraction when during the pregnancy, okay, to maintain the pregnancy. So it has very important role to play. Then inhibin, as its name suggests, inhibin will inhibit. Okay, so it will inhibit the release of FSH and to a lesser extent LH. So remember, inhibin will inhibit the release of FSH and to some extent LH, but basically it will inhibit the FSH hormone that is coming from the pituitary. Okay, so that was about the secretion and physiological effects of various hormones. We discussed the female reproductive cycle. We discussed about the various hormones. So these are very important topics from your exam point of view. So just try to go through these flowcharts type figures, so it will be easily you can remember the role of various hormones and their functions. So I would suggest all of you all who all has not downloaded the app, you can download the app and you can stay in contact with BioTecNika so that you can further keep attending these sessions. So this will help to enhance your knowledge. Okay, so let's solve few questions. So the first question is, which hormone is responsible for ovulation? Is it LH, is it FSH, estrogens, or thyroid hormone? Anybody can tell me what should be the right answer over here? Which hormone is responsible? Okay, so as we discussed, the hormone that is responsible for ovulation is LH. So remember, okay, don't get confused. The hormone that is responsible for ovulation is LH. So in this way, you can expect multiple choice questions. So the right answer is LH. Okay, next question is, tell me the correct sequence of hormone secretion from the beginning of menstruation. Okay, so you have to tell me the sequence. So I'm sure you all can remember it, okay, but yes, we saw a large number of hormones, but here the sequence that is being asked is from the beginning of menstruation. So from the beginning of menstruation, we saw the role of hormones like, no, we spoke about first what happens is the follicle development takes place, means first over here the first in sequence should be your FSH, right? And then the next should be the estrogens, and finally in the luteal phase we saw the role of progesterones. So in this way you have to remember the correct sequence of hormone secretion. So there are various other options that can confuse you, but yes, if you are no, if you are attentive, if you know the various phases properly, you can easily solve the question. Okay, next, one more question we have, and then we can stop over here. So hormone responsible for maintenance of corpus luteum after fertilization. Yes, anybody? What should be the hormone that is responsible for maintenance of corpus luteum? So corpus luteum is that part of follicle, okay, after the ovulation, the part that is remaining. So the hormone that is responsible for maintaining this corpus luteum, remember, it is your HCG hormone. Okay, so if HCG is present, only then the corpus luteum will be maintained. Otherwise the corpus luteum will degenerate and it will form corpus albicans. Okay, so the right answer over here is option 4. So with this, I come to the end of the session. So please, whoever has not join BioTecNika on the Telegram app. The link is given. And for any other queries, you can email us at info@biotecnica.org. You can even call at a toll-free number. Okay, the toll-free number is right at the screen. And do post your feedback, any testimonials, and how you like this session. You can write us at zipmessage.com/biotecnica. So thank you everyone. It was enlightening no discussion that I had with you all. So I would just end the session over here with the words: the tiny seed knew that in order to grow, it needed to be dropped in dirt, covered in darkness, and struggled to reach the light. Thank you, everyone.